Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to this month's webinar. I'm just going to give it a minute for everyone to join us. I see lots of people joining us today, which is great. It is the top of the hour, so we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone, to this month's webinar called How to Engage Challenging Training Participants. My name's Erin Clark. I'm from Endurance Learning. I'll be your producer today. When I'm not producing webinars, which quite honestly is most of the time, I work to support the instructional design needs of our clients here at Endurance Learning. As we get started, I want to direct your attention to that QR code on the screen. That's the QR code for the Endurance Learning LinkedIn page. We'd love to have you follow us there and hang out with us on LinkedIn. The other thing I want to bring your attention to, we hope you can stick around to the end of the webinar because we have two drawings today. We're going to choose two lucky winners. The first winner will be a winner for one of Brian Washburn's book. And you'll be able to choose between instructional design on a shoestring, which focuses more on the tactics of instructional design, or What's Your Formula, which focuses on bigger picture training program strategy. We'll also have a drawing for one of our e-learning courses, and I'll let Brian talk about that a little bit more at the end of today's webinar. And one more announcement before I introduce Brian. Registration is now open for next month's webinar. That webinar is called The Art and a Little Science of the Training Experience Debrief. The webinar will be on Thursday, April 9th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, and we really hope you'll join us. There's a QR code there on the screen if you want to go ahead and register for that right now. And with that, I'm going to introduce today's presenter. Our presenter today is Endurance Learning's co-founder, Brian Washburn. He's been in the world of training and instructional design for about 20 years. Most of his career was spent leading training teams in the nonprofit sector before he launched Endurance Learning in 2015. He's published two full-length books and countless articles on the topic of instructional design and training strategy. So now it's time for me to hand over the webinar to Brian.
Well, thank you, Aaron. Hello, everyone. I am Brian Washburn, as Aaron mentioned, and I'm with Endurance Learning. And I'd love to see or hear a little bit more about who we have joining us. And a lot of people have already been sharing their name and their hometown. So feel free to join into the chat. We'll be using the chat throughout the course of today's session. So this is just kind of warming you all up. I see that we have some folks from Central Washington, so hello, Washington State. I'm originally from Rochester, New York, relatively close to Buffalo, so go Bills. And also, if you're a hockey fan, go Sabres. They are hot, the hottest team in the NHL right now. And so a little bit more about me. I've been around in the world of learning and development for about 25 years, and one of the things that I've found is consistent every time I go out to do a training is that there are going to be some challenges. Sometimes it's the technical issues that we have. It could be the projector doesn't work, but a lot of times there's the human issue that comes up. So challenging participants, and I would love to hear as I see tons of comments coming in terms of where people are from. One question I'm going to start out just by asking is, what is the most challenging type of participant for you when it comes to a session that you have been delivering? So if you could just give a real quick thought in there in terms of, maybe a one, two, three-word description of a participant that maybe that you've faced once, or maybe it happens many times. That kind of persona of a challenging type of participant that you face. And so unable to connect from their cell phones. Yeah, absolutely. Camera off. So when it comes to virtual, yes, camera off. That's always a tricky one. And there's lots of different philosophies on it. I know that when I am having my camera on during a meeting or during a session, it definitely is more of a cue for me to pay attention. But sometimes people can't use their cameras or aren't able to use the cameras for some reason. Leaving the room frequently, closed off to learning, literally crossed arms, the distractor, skeptical to accept the training. All right, so we have the fixed mindset. We it talks too long and we're off topic, or on the flip side of that, somebody who won't engage. There's lots of different personas. And keep them thinks that they're the only one in the room, right? So keep those in mind. And what I want to do is just for a brief moment, I want to kind of flip our perspective here. I want to put us into the shoes of when we're actually the learner in a training session. And so go ahead and put your learner hat on for a second. I'm going to show you an image. We're going to put up a poll here. I'm going to ask if any of these thoughts have actually crossed your mind as a learner. So let me put up this image here, and we have some different thoughts that maybe crosses somebody's mind when they're a learner. So if you are a learner, and let's put up this poll, Aaron. There's a few different choices here. So have you ever had any of these thoughts? And you can choose as many as apply, or if you haven't had any of these thoughts, then don't choose anything. But choice A is I already know enough about this topic to do my job well, or B, I'm excited to share my thoughts on how I've handled certain things around this topic, or C, I've been doing this a while and I found a really good way to do this that nobody ever taught me. D, it's been a while since I've seen my colleague and we just have a lot to say to each other. Or E, I'm fine listening. I don't need to volunteer my thoughts in order to learn something. So we have lots of responses that are coming in. And so when we think of sometimes as a trainer, some of the most challenging personas, I didn't see any hesitation before those thoughts started coming in. And now when we put our learner hat on, when we're learners, we sometimes do these things too. I know for me, I am I usually fall in category E. I can probably fall in any of these, given the different topic or something like that. Typically, as a trainer, I love to engage people. As a learner, I hate to speak up. And the larger the room gets, the larger the audience gets, the easier it is for me to disappear. I just want to listen, and I'll soak in the information. Maybe I'll talk in small groups, but when it gets to a large group, I don't usually say things. I remember one time. I was actually in a training session, and the facilitator just asked us to raise our hands if something happened. I was just kind of sitting there, and I was like, "Oh, okay." He said this, and I thought it was kind of more of a rhetorical statement. I hadn't looked around, but everyone else in the room had their hand up, and so the facilitator looked at me and said, "Brian, you don't agree with that?" And suddenly I was on the spot, just because I was of that attitude that I wasn't going to participate. And so there are some different ways to handle some of these. Now, let me ask you another question, and it's going to be a yes or no question, so you can go ahead and put this into the chat. Because you've had these thoughts, let me ask you another question. Do those thoughts make you a bad person? Go go ahead and I'm seeing lots of no's. Do I see any yeses? I see all no's. All right, so these when we have a challenging participant, it's not that they're a bad person, right? We just have to figure out what's driving that behavior because there's could be a lot of different things behind that behavior. And then when we can kind of think through and make sure that we are of the mindset that I have so much to cover. I've put so much thought and work into this, and now I have this person who's being challenging, right? It's not that they're a bad person. And so let's talk about what we're going to cover here in today's session. The first thing is we're going to take a closer look at some of the different, more popular challenging personas. There will always be kind of a one-off situation that might be new that we haven't encountered before. I'm not going to talk about those, but I do want to focus on some of the most common challenging personas and what's underneath that, the impact it can have on the training environment, and what we can do about that, or some different options we can do about that. And then what we're going to do is after I kind of talk through some of these things, together as a group, we're going to navigate a situation that features a pair of challenging participants. It's going to be a branching scenario that we're all going to kind of handle together as a group. We're going to pull out some polls and see which direction you go, a little bit of a choose your own adventure style type of thing. And then finally, towards the end, towards the second half of the session, you're gonna have a chance to work through an interactive case study in smaller groups. So I do put this advisory out there that there will be an interactive case study in here, which you'll be put into breakout rooms. I know that we have 153 people on here right now. When we open up the breakout room, suddenly that number may go down. But I will encourage you, if you are the type of participant who might be a little challenging from a facilitator's perspective, where you're thinking, I don't do breakout rooms. One of the things that we have heard after a year of doing these webinars is that sometimes the most valuable pieces of information, takeaways, or content comes from those small group discussions. And so if you're not usually somebody who participates in breakout rooms, I'm just going to encourage you to give it a chance. We have, we have, I like Michelle's honesty in the comments. You're not a bad person, but they are bad on my nerves. Absolutely. And so my colleague Rachel is going to put the handout for this session into the chat here. Now, this is a PDF file. It's a kind of a long file, and I will kind of share why it's so long in a little bit because there's a whole scenario that's in there. But that first page after that title page of the handout is a fillable PDF. And so you'll be able to just kind of take some notes in there if you so choose. The rest of the handout we'll be using as the session goes on. And it is not choose your own adventure because that's already copyrighted. This is set your own boundaries. So as a trainer, as a facilitator, we're going to work on setting our own boundaries through this. But there is this first page gives you the four different personas that we're going to be talking about and some space to fill in some notes here. So let's go ahead and get started with these different personas and let's talk about some of them. The first person might be what we could call or put a label if we had to put a label on them. Maybe this is the experienced and bored participant, the person who comes into the room and says, "I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm not sure what I could possibly learn in this session. I'm not sure I want to change anything at this point anyway, right? So maybe there is something that you can teach me, but I don't know that I need to get any better. Or I'm really only here because my boss sent me." I'm going to kind of walk through each of these personas and I'm going to ask you just to kind of share some of your own thoughts, some of your own experiences, maybe some of the strategies that you've used in the chat. And I'm going to, so you can choose to write some things in the chat or you can choose just to soak in this information. It's really going to be up to you as we get going here. But the first thing I'd love to hear from you, if you so choose, is how can this impact the training environment, right? So we have somebody who comes in and they're kind of what we call the experienced and bored person. They've been doing this for 20 years. I'm not sure what I could possibly learn from you, or I'm not sure that I want to learn anything. I was just told to be here because my boss told me to. Yeah, and I'm starting to see some comments already. It sets a bad example. It gives negative energy, or it's an energy sucker. One of the things that this does is it can create an erosion of psychological safety. A lot of times people show up at training and they're ready to learn, and then suddenly they hear this, and it can take that away. Or maybe those feelings of being annoyed can get contagious and other people can jump in. It can distract from group activities. It can disrupt the validity of what we're presenting. Absolutely. So this is again, not necessarily a bad person. I don't think this person, any of the people who would say any of these statements, wakes up and looks at themselves in the mirror in the morning and thinks, how can I make this life hard on Brian? This is just kind of the attitude that they might show or bring with them into the room. And some of the things that might drive this behavior is that it's an experienced professional, right? They have experience or they feel like they have better things to do than sitting in your training session. Maybe they feel like this is beneath them in some way. Maybe they feel like they're already successful enough, or maybe they feel like they could or should be teaching this class. And just a reminder that none of those things that I just shared, or none of the things I'm going to share that drive other personas, really come from a malevolent point of view or intent. But it is something that we need to figure out how to engage this because we need to be able to make sure that this is a good learning environment for everyone involved, that person as well as everyone else. And so, how do we engage this person? And I'd love if you have some thoughts or strategies that you've taken, feel free to drop those into the chat as well, because we can just kind of build a whole kind of library of ways to engage some of these personas. I'm going to kind of break this particular situation up into a few things that we might want to do, and definitely one thing that we're going to want to avoid doing when addressing this persona. So the first thing is trust your process and trust your content. If you've been asked to deliver a training session, there's a reason why you were asked to do that. And somebody who comes in and says, I have 20 years of experience, I could probably be teaching this class. Okay, they can say that, and that can really play with your mind a little bit as a facilitator. But trust your process, trust the content that you've put in there. Um, at the same time, have some humility, right? So one of the things I like to do, and I'm doing it right here, I don't hold a monopoly on all that is wise and good. There are some really good thoughts. I'm pointing over here because this is where I'm seeing the chat come in. There's some really good thoughts in chat for this particular session. There's always good thoughts that will come from my participants, and I want the participants to share some of those things. So I don't hold a monopoly on all that is wise and good. Establish relationship with that person. Talk with them at a break, maybe. So you've been doing this for 20 years. What's been kind of the craziest thing you've seen, or whatever it might be, just to recognize that, hey, I see you. And it's not a threat, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about where you're coming from. Maybe identify their expertise and lean on it during a session. One of the things that we want to make sure that we do not do in this situation, and it's very tempting. I know that when I feel challenged, sometimes I'm tempted to do this, but this is a do not do at any cost, is try to prove that you know more than them, right? Because then it becomes a me versus that person type of thing. And it's very possible that I don't know more than them. Right. So there's a reason why I'm doing this training session. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that I have more experience than anybody else who's ever covered this topic. So we do need to make sure that we don't turn this into an us versus them type of thing. I love what some of the things that people have written in the chat have to say as well. I'm going to keep moving on, but please do, as you're taking notes here, I certainly have lots to share, but we are seeing some top-notch suggestions here in the chat as well. The second persona is what I call the extrovert. Now, this is the person, and an extrovert can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. A lot of times, the classic definition of extrovert is that just get energy being around people. Now, in this particular persona, I'm going to describe this as it's the first person to offer a response to your questions. I saw earlier when I was talking about what are some of the most challenging people you've faced. One person said, the person who thinks they're the only person in the room, right? So the first person to offer a response to your questions, they have something to add to every point that you make. They have something to add to other people's thoughts, right? They take over small group discussions, and when you get that kind of person in here, I'm kind of curious in terms of when you've been in front of that type of person before. Um, I'm just reading the chat, and I love the sense of humor that a lot of people bring to these sessions. But when you get into a training environment where you have the extrovert, what is the impact that it could have on your training environment when you have one person who's the first person to respond, always adding to your points or other people's points? Um, yeah, so we're already getting into some strategies. Assign them a role, absolutely. Other people don't answer or share their points of view. Others can withdraw, absolutely. Others can check out. I know that when I'm in a session as a learner and somebody else is offering all their responses, I'm like, "Ooh, this is great. I can just sit back," right? And so I don't have to be as present. Others don't feel comfortable speaking. That could happen too. Some other things that we have is narrative hijacking, right? So if one person is offering all the thoughts and sharing all the anecdotes, we could spend 20 minutes on that anecdote before we can get back to the topic. Or others, something else, people get annoyed, share one more point and then ask if others have ideas. So we have some strategies in here. Something else that happens here is that when you toss out a question and so it's not even raising hands, somebody just shouts out the answer every time. other people don't even have time to process, even if they wanted to answer. Because suddenly, when somebody has a thought or answer that comes out, it disrupts that processing ability, and that person might also hijack some small group discussion. So I see some people raising their hands saying, "I'm guilty of this." I remember when my grad school program, when I had a class on training and facilitation, I was the worst at this. This was me. And I could see how annoyed my professor would get sometimes. But I just had a lot to say. It didn't make me a bad person, but hopefully everybody else could have appreciated my contributions as well. But I do know that other people needed to also be engaged here. So, what might drive this behavior? It's an experienced professional. They're excited about this topic. They feel they're good with this topic and they have lots of share, or maybe even they feel there's a better way to talk about this topic, right? It comes from a good place. I think I hear what he's saying, but there's a better way to talk about this. Or maybe they feel like there's more to this topic than is being said by you or others in the room. And that could very well be true. I know that for me, a lot of times I stuff a lot in and I need to keep moving. And so I don't get to talk about every single thing about the topic, but that's not the purpose of the session also. So we do need to keep that in mind. How do we engage this? We can acknowledge this, thank you for the contribution, and pivot, right? Go right back to what we're saying. Or and I see there's some really great thoughts in here already in terms of how you might address this. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll say, okay, thank you, Brian. And does anybody else have any thoughts? So let's hear from somebody else. Sometimes it's helpful to pause, even if we have a series of large group discussions or questions to pause that to toss that to large group. When we see this, it is okay to pivot our strategy. And sometimes we might want to just say, all right, before I get an answer for this next question, what I want people to do is to think about this question first. I don't want to hear any thoughts or answers. I want you to think about this first. Then what I would like you to do is just turn to the person next to you and share, right? So this stops this allows people to time to process and stops one person from dominating the entire group. Or, sometimes it's just helpful to physically fix your gaze. If we have the person who's always answering over here, sometimes I will look over here after my question, even if that person has their hand up, and I'll say, does anybody have any thoughts? Anybody at all, right? And sometimes that gets a chuckle. That person who always has their hand up gets kind of the point sometimes. And then there's always the parking lot opportunity as well. And so especially if somebody has a lot to say or wanted to expand upon it, you know what? I hear what you're saying. If you could write that topic down, put it up on the parking lot, we'll come back to it coming out of a break or during a break or something. But we do need to move on. All right. Yes, the story wall. Absolutely. All right. So let's go on to persona number three, the sociable participants. And this is the kind of persona where we might get people who engage in side conversations while you're speaking. They engage in side conversations during small group discussions. Um, I'm just gonna send a quick message, then I'll put my phone away. Seriously, just one more message. So these are the folks that like to engage with other people as well as you and as the facilitator. And so when we talk about this kind of participant, I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have here in terms of how this can impact the training environment. I know that for me as a facilitator, it can be distracting. As a learner, it can be distracting. It can be annoying. I love what Tracy had to say here in terms of setting expectations and boundaries early on, and I think it's a good rule of thumb for all of these. Absolutely. This can it's rude, right? So some people kind of see this as it is just rude. Having working agreements to start is a really good strategy. In terms of what could drive this behavior, oh, I'm sorry. Some of the other things that this could do to impact the learning environment, it is distracting. It also can be contagious, right? Any of these behaviors can become contagious if we don't address it. And so this can give permission to others to engage in this kind of behavior. Or, it leads to multitasking. I can multitask. I can listen to what you're saying and also send an email. And the truth is that you can't. The brain can't handle two attention requiring activities at the same time. I can either focus on this email that I'm sending to my boss, or I can focus on this new topic that I'm learning. I can't do both. And so when people try to use that excuse as multitasking, it actually physiologically does not work. So some things that could drive this behavior. And I love some of these strategies here. We'll talk about this in just a second, but some things that could drive this behavior is that the participants are friends. Maybe they have lots of non-training thoughts on their mind. Maybe they feel like they know the answers, but they're not confident enough to share in the large group. So sometimes the side conversations that are happening are on topic, but it's just somebody who doesn't necessarily have enough confidence to speak up in the large group, so they kind of whisper it to the neighbors or whatever. Or maybe sometimes it's somebody who has a question about the topic, but they're not willing to share it in the large group because they don't want to ask a dumb question. So sometimes that's what's happening too. So sometimes those side conversations can be social, sometimes they're on topic, and we just need to be aware of what's happening here. We always have we have some really good thoughts here already in the chat in terms of how we might engage this kind of persona, and I just kind of want to give a rule of thumb when trying to do this. And I think that that some other folks have mentioned this also in the chat, but the overall goal here is to make sure that we can connect with the participants without creating any sort of hostile student-teacher dynamic, right? We've all been there in grade school where we've been caught talking to the person who's sitting next to us. We don't want that feeling with a bunch of adults in a room. So if we can, let's try to avoid again, the us versus them. I'm the authority figure. I love what people have put in here already in terms of using the group agreements to start. I know that I'm really guilty that a lot of times when especially a shorter session, an hour session, 2 hour session, I don't usually do group agreements, and so I'll skip that step and then I will regret it instantly when people are chatting because this is something that can come up when you're establishing group agreements. I see that somebody mentioned this next comment as well. This idea of proximity control. So if some people are talking, sometimes it's effective just to continue your message while you meander over to where this group might be talking, right? And that almost always will stop them from talking, at least in the moment, because they notice that you've noticed what's happening. Sometimes it's helpful just to stop mid-sentence, right? So if and let the conversation that's happening be the loudest conversations happening in the room, and when people find that out, that they can self apologize or they have some self-awareness and apologize for it as well, knowing that they're busted. And then there's a couple other thoughts here. Directly address it during maybe a small group conversation. So while you have people doing small group conversations all over the room, address it with the participants that seem to be having the side conversations. Again, not necessarily in the large room, because if we can avoid making it an us versus them type of dynamic, that's more ideal. Or listening to the table group conversations. And maybe monitor. Maybe those conversations are on topic, so monitor for questions that aren't being asked in the large group. And then just a reminder, devices can be used during breaks, during lunch. If I recognize that life doesn't stop when we're in a training session. So if you do have an email that you have to send or a phone call that you have to make, feel free to step out of the room and do that, and then come on back so you can be present. One more persona, and then we're going to start to navigate some interactive case studies here that involve these personas. This last one, the quiet observer. So this is the type of person who doesn't offer thoughts in the large group. Maybe they sit silently in the small group discussions as well, or they'll step out during small group discussions. So some questions that I have here in terms of how can oftentimes we think of the silent person as not the problem participant, but how can this impact our training environment when you think of the person that will remain silent or they don't speak up even in small groups? Or maybe if we're going to put them into small groups, they have a habit of needing to step out just when we get the small group conversations going. So how can this impact? Yes, absolutely. Angela has a comment that's it's hard, it's impossible to assess whether or not they're getting it. I'm with you, Davita. This is me as well. Um, Rebecca says this is not me. Ask them questions directly. So one of the things, excuse me, one of the things about calling on what when I do a train the trainer session, I will always advise people to avoid calling out somebody by name. I will offer people an opportunity to do a think, compare, share because sometimes I've had people come up to me during sessions, leadership have come up to me and said, I know that we don't have everybody. There's a few people who aren't speaking up when we have a large group debrief. And my response is oftentimes they're not speaking up in the large group, but they are participating in the small group. And so if we can structure things where there's individual reflections, if we can structure things where we can have small group conversations, sometimes that's helpful. But before I get into solutioning, let's talk just real quick about what's driving this behavior, what could be driving this behavior. So sometimes a person might feel like this training is for others, it's not for them. Sometimes they're just not comfortable speaking in front of others. Sometimes they lack confidence in their own ideas. Sometimes they just want to sit back and soak in the knowledge of others. Sometimes they're just ambivalent about the topic. So these are just some of what many of driving factors that might be behind this type of behavior. But if we can allow time for processing, oftentimes that is helpful. Again, going back to this idea of, all right, let's take a moment so that everybody has a chance to process, think about it, turn to the person next to you. When you have to pair up, it is really difficult to keep your mouth shut. You're kind of a jerk if you do. So when we can put people into pairs, that's kind of my solution instead of calling somebody directly by name. Aaron, what's the answer to this? Because that can surprise somebody and it can really make them anxious. And when anxiety goes up, the ability to learn goes down. So I like to try to use strategies that don't necessarily call people out in the large group if they're not comfortable for that, but they still do like a think, pair, share. They have to pair up with somebody and actually share some answers. Or maybe it's small group conversations. Something else that could be helpful is anonymous responses. So it could be using something like Menti or Poll Everywhere, where people are polling and sharing their thoughts. It could be, all right, everybody, let's take out some sticky notes. One idea per sticky note, and let's put them up on the flip chart. So go ahead, raise your hand when you have it up there, and I'll take the sticky notes from you. Something else that could be helpful is just check in during a break. Maybe something is happening where that person is distracted from things that are happening outside of the classroom, or having activities where there are written reflections or journaling helps to make sure that everyone is engaged. All right, so. Those are four personas. Now, let's think through how we might actually apply some of these strategies. So, what I've done and this is kind of on the third page, I think, of your handout is the first story. But what we're going to do here is I'm going to start going through a story. I'm going to read it to you, and then we're going to throw up a poll when it's time to make a decision. And we're going to let kind of the plurality rule. So whatever decision has the most votes, we're going to go and follow that decision through. And we'll have several decisions to make. And so. Here we go. Let's take a look at this first scenario with a challenging persona or several challenging personas. Following the first several activities on the first day of a 3-day workshop, you notice that most participants have been focused and willing to participate in a variety of activities, and most participants are listening, making eye contact, nodding their heads during moments where you're making a presentation or you're delivering a short lecture. As you approach your morning break, you have noticed, however, that two participants at your table to your right seem to have spent more time whispering and talking to each other than they've been participating in the activities. So we have a decision to make here. I'm going to give you three choices. And then we're going to put up a poll here. So the first choice is, do you A, keep an eye on the situation and see if the behavior continues, but for the moment, you choose not to address this with your participants. B, before the break, you decide to make a general comment to the room about being respectful and staying focused on the activities and discussions in the workshop. Or do you go with C? During the break, you notice that one of the participants has been having side conversations and they're sitting at the table. You decide to say something to this participant. So we have a poll up here. We have A, B, and C are our choices. We'll give a few moments for people to vote on this, and the voting is very even at the moment. It's always fascinating to watch real-time live polling coming in. Go ahead and get your thoughts in there. We'll close out the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.5. Still see some votes coming in. 1. All right, this is it's pretty close. So maybe if we want to, we can redo this story and we can try a different path. But here, what we're going to do is A is the winner. So we're going to start, we'll keep an eye on the situation and see if the behavior continues. But for the moment, we'll choose not to address this with our participants. So let's choose A. All right. So as the rest of the morning session unfolds, a combination of you presenting some key information and the participants working in small groups to discuss some of the content, you notice that the behavior continues. These two participants continue to remain quiet as you present information, but they continue to talk between themselves while others at their table engage in the small group discussion. So let's talk about another decision we have to make. And I'm going to give you 5 choices here. So the first choice is you have identified these two participants as senior leaders. And when you've heard them speaking, you notice that they're speaking about the activities at times. Other times, they seem to be talking about other ways that this program could benefit the rest of the organization. Deferring to their position in the organization, you choose to continue to monitor their behavior, but you've decided to refrain from saying anything for now. So that's the first choice. Second choice, during a small group activity, you decide to use proximity control by walking over to their table and standing near them while the rest of the group is discussing. You hope that your physical presence will subtly signal that you are aware of their side conversation and encourage them to redirect their focus to the group task without you having to say a word. Choice 3, or C, you decide to lean into their expertise by specifically calling on one of them during the next full group debrief. You ask their perspective on how the current topic applies to their specific department, aiming to pull them out of their private bubble and reintegrate their insights into collective experience of the room. Option D, you choose to address this behavior through a process check with the entire room before transitioning to the next module. You state, I'm noticing some great energy in the room, but I want to make sure our small group discussions are inclusive of everyone at the table so no one misses out on the peer-to-peer learning, aiming to set a firm but indirect boundary. And our final choice here, after noticing the behavior persists through the second hour, you decide to pull both participants aside for a quick private conversation during the transition. You frame it as a request for help, saying, I've noticed you two have a lot of side reflections. I'd love for you to share those gems with the whole group because your leadership perspective is so valuable to the others here. All right. So we have some choices here for branching scenario 2. Let's see how we're going to address this. All right, we're going to close this poll in 5, 4. You can change your answers if you reread something, you want to do a different choice. 3, 2, 1. All right, we're going to go with choice E. After noticing their behavior persists through the second hour, you pull both participants aside for a quick conversation. So let's see what happens here. Following lunch, you notice that these two participants are delayed returning to the room, though everyone else seems to have returned on time. They apologize for being late and quickly take their seats, once again seated next to one another. Throughout the afternoon, their behavior patterns do not change. They remain attentive during portions in which you deliver a lecture or presentation, and then they oscillate between engaging in small group discussions and having their own sidebar conversations. As you look at others sitting near them, as well as others at nearby tables, You notice that the others are noticing the same pattern of behavior from these two participants. During your afternoon break, you even hear several participants from another table mention there are two participants in another table that seem to be off in their own world. All right, so these participants are intractable. So let's talk about this for a second. When it comes to this particular situation, what strategies, if any, worked well here? Did anything work for us as we were going through this? I'll go ahead and if you'd like to put something in the chat, let's see how things happened here. Yeah, I'm seeing no. This particular branch that we went down, nothing seemed to work for these folks. And so, if this was to go on, we would kind of try to figure out what were some of the unintended consequences. So sometimes when we do something and we're trying to make a decision in real time about participant management and things like that, sometimes there's some unintended consequences. Was there anything that happened that we didn't intend to happen? As this went on. They were a distraction to other participants. Absolutely. We even saw that, right? So we could even hear in the room that there was some distracting. It seemed to cause others to have side conversations. They tried to show disrespect by coming back from the break late. Yeah, so we spoke with them and suddenly they come back from the break late even. So there's some things going on here that were challenging. We could so I'm kind of curious in this particular situation. What might you have done differently than perhaps any of the choices that we're offered here? I know that sometimes when we're given choices, maybe sometimes it's not what we would have chosen, but it's the best of the choices that are available. Is there anything that you would have done differently based on kind of the situation? I see switch table groups up. Yeah. So I think that this is in this particular case was I had a very specific case in mind. And that did happen. It happened throughout the course of day one. It was a 3-day training session. In the evening of day one, I spoke with one of the participants and said, this just it really made me uncomfortable because you are one of the leaders of this organization, but you're having different conversations. And so, would it be okay if you two split up the next day? And that's kind of something that worked for us. Usually, no sidebars is a working agreement. Absolutely, addressing it sooner could have been helpful. Reminder after the break about being respectful. Yeah. So I think there's some direct conversations that perhaps could have happened there. All right. We've gone through one. We've had a little bit of conversation. I would love to have more conversation about this. Unfortunately, we have 18 minutes left in our session, and so time is flying. We are going to set you all up into small groups here. So it's going to be your turn. I'm going to ask you to turn to page 23 in that handout. And Aaron is going to put you into small groups. So we're going to put you into small groups. For those that can't get into a breakout room, hold tight. We're going to do this together in this general session with the folks that are here and that can't get into the breakout room. But why don't we go ahead and put breakout rooms up and we'll ask you to turn to page 23. The way that this is going to work is you are going to turn to page 23. You're going to see a scenario similar to what we just did. And then you will come to options, and each option will tell you to turn to a different page number. And so you'll be able to continue the story. You'll have two decision points, and then you'll have to skip to a different page number based on the option that you choose. So that's how this is going to work. Aaron, are we ready for breakout rooms? And Lori, I see your comment, so feel free to stay. Oh, you're going to be disconnecting, but for those who can't get into breakout rooms, stick around and we'll take on the big room here. Looks like folks have been getting into their breakout rooms. I'll give folks another moment or two, and then with the folks that are left here, we'll take on situation number two. All right. Welcome to the folks that couldn't get into breakout rooms. You are here in the largest breakout room in the world with 44 participants right now. And so we're going to just go ahead and go through this particular situation. You have this in your handouts as well. And so what we're going to do, similar to what we just did, I'm going to read it. We don't have a poll set up for here. So I'll just ask you to use the chat to help me figure out do we want to choose option one, two, or three here. So with this scenario and the way that it starts is that during your introductory activity, one participant shares that they have been doing this work for more than 20 years, and they're not sure why they were told to attend today's session, but their boss wanted them here. So they figured they'd make the most of it. I'm going to be honest, they say, and this is nothing against you as a trainer, but I've been doing this long enough that I'm not looking for new gimmicks. I really am not sure that I'll learn anything new, but you can try. And as you scan the room to see how the rest of the participants react to this experienced learner, all eyes seem to be on you, as if everyone in the room is curious to see how you'll handle this comment. And so here we have an option, and you can start to write your options that you choose here in the chat. Option one, you smile and nod, say thank you, and move on to the next participant to introduce themselves. Option two, you choose to address this comment directly before moving on, referring back to the learning objectives for today's session that are still on the slide that's projected onto the screen at the front of the room. I hear what you're saying, you say, and I hope that you'll at least be willing to bring in your own experiences to our conversations around all these objectives today. Option three, you're confident in your content, activities, materials, and before you move on to the next person to introduce themselves, you say, I'm going to make you a promise, a guarantee. Right now, at the beginning of our session, I guarantee you will walk out of here with at least one new strategy by the end of today's workshop. So we have three different options here. Go ahead and I'm seeing a lot of folks wanting to go with option two. Anybody want to choose anything different before? Oh, I see somebody who would like to combine options. Unfortunately, the way that this PDF file works is we can't turn to the same two different pages at the same time. But let's take a look. Option two says, let's turn to page 29. So let's go down to page 29 and see what happens here. All right. Following your request. So we've asked the person to share their own experiences throughout the course of the day. You're looking forward to hearing their experiences. Following your request, the experienced participant begins contributing, but they use the learning objectives as a springboard to explain why past initiatives failed rather than focusing on future solutions. During the first small group activity, they took over their table, leading a storytelling session about the old way instead of completing the assigned worksheet. When you bring the room back together, you realize the table has no notes on their flip chart. The participant speaks up for the group, sharing a summary of the old way and why it was effective. So now we have four different ways we can go here. Yeah, Tammy mentions it's scary to make a guarantee. If we have some time, I'll come back to that because it's kind of a fun thing to do. But you better be confident in your materials that they're going to learn something new. All right, but here we have the four options, right? So the person has taken over their small group table and has been talking about the old way. So option one. Thank the participant for sharing that historical context and move on to the next group's report out. Option two, acknowledge the effectiveness of the old way and follow up by asking the participant to identify one specific element of that success that they can adapt to the new model being taught today. Option three, politely note that their table missed the current activity's objective and let everyone know that we'll be taking 3 more minutes to work in small groups, making sure that the group with the experienced participant uses this time to translate their old way discussion into the actual questions they were asked to discuss. So, everybody, we're going back to the groups. This group, please focus on the questions you were asked. And option four, invite the rest of the room to weigh in on whether the old way would still be viable given today's environment. So, what do we got here? I am seeing lots of option twos. So, still option twos, lots of option twos. Option two, four might benefit as well, but it's a risk on the timing. Option three, all right. So I'm seeing option two as being the dominant. I'm seeing some votes for four here, which is to invite the rest of the room to weigh in on whether the old way was still viable, opening up to the group. right? But what I'm seeing the most choices here, most votes here is option two. So let's take a look at that on page 31. So this is acknowledge the effectiveness of the old way and follow up by asking the participant to identify something, one specific element of success that they can adapt to the new model. So I hear what you're saying, and how would you use that in the new model? What was helpful? Let's not throw away the baby with the bathwater. Let's hold on to some of the stuff that was helpful. So let's go to page 31. The participant pauses, identifies a core principle of personal touch from the old way, and explain how it could actually strengthen the new model you're presenting. This aha moment resonates with both the seasoned and newer staff, turning a potential conflict into collaborative synthesis. So option two seems to have a little bit of a happier outcome, at least in the moment, than what we had with our first story, which is great. And so let's turn to page 38 and take a look at some of these questions here. And Aaron, I know that we're going to bring the groups back here in just a moment, but I'm just kind of curious. So why don't we take a look at one of these questions at least, and what worked as a okay. So the question number three, I'm kind of curious. What worked as a result of the actions that we took in this particular situation? I'd love to, if you want to kind of share in the chat, what was helpful in this in the choice that we made and led to the outcome that led to, which for me seemed a little bit positive, and that person was starting to work. See, they were seeing that we recognize the value in their experience, and then they were bringing their own experience into the new model as well. Jan says keeping that person engaged and harnessing their expertise. I think that is a really helpful rule of thumb. When we have somebody who is, or guiding principle, excuse me, when we have somebody who's really experienced, it's really helpful to acknowledge their experience, let them know that they're seen, and also build on that and say, well, I get it, but we're not talking about the old way. It's respectful and it's not scolding. It helps others know what they may be facing upon their return to their own people under the leadership and help them with buy-in from change, recognizing the expertise. Yep, honors the experience and allows them to see how the old can help transform the new in a way that can be used. I love these comments. Aaron, how are we doing?
I was just going to close the rooms, so I'm going to
Perfect.
bring everyone back.
Awesome. Thank you all for staying engaged here in this general room. All right, it looks like we are getting folks back from their breakout rooms, and as folks continue to join us here, let's take a look. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the debriefing here. And so for our group here in the large room, we chose option two and option two. So we chose to kind of recognize the person's experience, but ask them to contribute. We hear what you're saying about the old way, but tell us about how that can help benefit some of the things that we're trying to focus on today. I would love to hear from the rest of the group, and we don't have a ton of time, but maybe one or two people. Maybe if you want to raise your hand, even because I'm seeing I love this activity. This is great experience. So I'd love to hear some of the thoughts that you have. Um, if somebody can raise their hand and just kind of share what choices for your group worked well, did you encounter any unintended consequences? Is there anything that you would have done differently? And Matt, if we can take Matt off of mute, would love to hear from Matt.
You know me, Brian. I'm always the first one to speak up.
I love it. And
I
that's
just
the
thought
nice
I'd
thing
get
about
everybody.
the virtual session is that I can mute people, so I don't have to kind of listen to the same person every once in a while. But thank you, Matt, for
Yeah,
volunteering.
I
Go
hate
for
awkward pauses. That's why I always go first. I think
it.
I think it looks like a lot of people did. I think we chose. I can even go back. Option two in both cases. Just because. Let me see what page is it. Here we go. It seemed the first one would be. I took some notes. Wait. Here we go. Um, just saying thank you is not really doing a lot. I said that was my first choice because I'm lazy. I just want to shut up. Let's move on. but the other people brought up, all the ladies brought up some great points. Number two, you actually addressed the comments. So you actually included them, but told you that you were acknowledging that you heard what they were saying, and then you moved on. We thought number two was the best one. Went to page 29, same thing. Number two seemed to be the first one. I think option four was out right away because you invite the rest of the room. That may lead to some kind of a discussion or maybe some kind of an altercation. Don't really want to open that up. Three was, we didn't have a lot of time, so two was the best one. Acknowledge the effectiveness of the old way, follow up asking participants to identify.
Yeah,
Um,
and Matt, thank you so much. Yes, I love all of that conversation. I love the fact that your group debated. Should we just move on, or should we acknowledge it in some way, shape, or form with option two versus option one? And so that is oftentimes the internal debate that we have as well. And a lot of times I will just move on. But as you can see in this particular case, that may not have been as effective. I see. We'll take one more comment and then we'll move to wrap this up. So I see Deborah has her hand up.
We also did two and two, but the my objection, and I think that was shared by some of the folks, is that this probably shouldn't have happened at all, that the facilitator should have been dipsticking and listening to what's happening in each of the groups. I have people do their work on a flip chart, so it becomes very obvious if they're not on target.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I always get anxious when most groups have finished their flip charts and one group hasn't even started it yet. It's definitely something where the facilitator, another piece of facilitation is monitoring the group conversations. And you put people in small groups, it's not a break for the facilitator. It's time to actually be listening in. And so that's another great observation there. Now, one last thing I'll say about this particular activity is that you have these handouts. You may have just chosen a path, choice two, and then choice two. If you want to go back and reread this scenario and make some different choices, you'll see some different outcomes. And this can be kind of a useful exercise just to get yourself thinking. And that gets me to my kind of closing question in terms of which of these people, which of these personas is your personal kryptonite? And there is if you think about that for a moment, which one of these makes you most anxious? There is some space on page 39 to write out a script. And I see some votes happening here too. Thank you for putting that poll up there. That strong-willed skeptic is not just anxiety producing, it could be intimidating. And so something that can be helpful sometimes is if we have written out a script in terms of how we want to approach the situation in advance, and we have that in our back pocket. And so on page 39 of your handout, it's the last page of your handout, there's some space for you to write your own personal script and think about how you can actually approach these kinds of situations so that you have a plan as you go into the situation. Now, hold that plan loosely because different people will react differently and have different motivations, as we talked about here. So you may not be able to just pull it out and read it verbatim, but at least you can be prepared for how you might address some of these different types of personas. I really appreciate everybody for sticking around, for making it through these breakout rooms. I do have just a few quick announcements, and then we're going to do a drawing. As we mentioned, next month, we're going to be talking about the art and a little science of the training experience debrief. Debriefing is where so much of the learning happens. And so if you'd like to kind of work on leveling up your skills when it comes to debriefing training activities, I invite you to join us next month. There's a QR code, and the link is down there at the bottom of the screen as well. I'm sure that if you have signed up for this webinar, you will get many other emails about that session between now and April 9th as well. But we'd love to have you join us. The other thing is, again, we'd love to have you connect with us on LinkedIn. This is where we make a lot of announcements about things like our webinars or other things like that that we have going on. And so if you would like to connect with us on LinkedIn, we'd love to talk with you in more depth. Beyond that, I really appreciate everybody for spending some time, spending an hour, investing an hour in yourselves this morning or this afternoon, wherever you might be. So thank you for joining us. We have